Everybody had a chance, I think, to take a pause yesterday, turn on the television, stream the coverage, because there was so much anxiety leading up to that verdict. Would the justice system work? Would it be a fair trial? Is it working the way it's supposed to for George Floyd and others? So this morning, joining me, as you said, Representative Ras Smith. Good morning to you. Thank you for making the time to be here. Where were you yesterday? I'm sure you, like everybody else, you kind of said everything else in life is going to be put on hold. I need to see this actually unfold. Where were you, and what was it like seeing it?
Yeah, so I was at, well, thank you for having me first and foremost. I was at my place here in Des Moines. We finished session a little bit early, not a lot of debate yesterday, and so sitting there after doing some work and watching, and I didn't realize I was silent for about 5 minutes as, leading up to the verdict. So sitting here in my place and watching that come down by myself was kind of a surreal moment, a historic moment, but it was a little bit complex, or maybe conflicted, I would say.
Conflicted because for folks that were outside of the courthouse up in Minneapolis, they said it was like a football team scored a touchdown. Right. But then there was this somber sadness because Derek Chauvin's guilty, but George Floyd is still dead, and he's not going to be able to come back. So it's still this underlying sadness of the act that unfortunately took his life. Did you get a sense of that at first? There was that, you felt like the justice system worked, but then the sadness of, look what got us to this point.
Well, I think it's all those things. I think you add in on top of those factors the fact that it did feel like, justice being served, in this sense anyway, felt like a team scoring a touchdown. Mm-hmm. It felt like a victory when our criminal justice system is one that's designed, at least in theory, that it's supposed to apply justice. It's supposed to apply righteousness to these situations. And so when we see it happen few and far between, it feels like that. And so for me, that's the conflict that exists. Is this shouldn't be a one-off instance. This should be a normal thing that we get to experience, and there shouldn't be so much elation when justice is served. That should be the norm, not the exception. And so I think that's a lot of the conflict that I had, and I know a lot of other folks as well.
We're going to get to what's happening at the session right now as it relates to reform. There's been emphasis placed on it. The governor wanted to see reform done. There's active legislation right now that you had a chance to weigh in on. It's been changing a little bit, and we'll get to that coming up here in the next half hour. But when you look at law enforcement in general, there is a renewed push now that this verdict has come down. You hear things like defund the police. When you look at law enforcement in a holistic approach, what are your viewpoints?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to listen and have conversation. One of my best friends, the father-in-law or godfather of my children, is in law enforcement, and oftentimes he talks about his most feared interactions are those when he comes upon someone who may be suffering from a brain health episode, right? And if that's 40% of what his job is, he's not equipped to deal with that, and doesn't want to have to deal with that either. He prefers to somebody who's trained to do that. And so I think that's a great place to start. We've seen communities across our state adding brain health professionals alongside law enforcement to address some of these issues. But I think when we look at the overarching plan, I was told some years back during one of our trainings in Waterloo that it's God, the police, and everybody else. That can't be the mindset that we have when we send individuals into our communities who are geared with making sure that we're all safe in an equitable manner. And so I think it starts with seeking to understand, right, what it looks like to be in a community of color, what it looks like to be in a community of underserved individuals where the socioeconomic status is considered low, and how you interact with those communities, but also the field is changing. And law enforcement seems to be open to that change. It's the elected officials that are oftentimes being the roadblock. And so when I say we need to listen, we need to take into consideration, right, the recommendations that they made to the governor and her task force, and apply those things as necessary.
Gotcha. And we're going to talk more about that, like we said, exactly, in the next half hour. 3 other trials to go in the specific George Floyd case. Looking forward, it's a sensitive topic, right? Yeah. Like we saw, things stayed civil last night, which I think everybody was happy for, and that's some of the anxiety that we all felt, what was going to happen after the verdict. Things stayed civil, and folks were celebrating, marching. 3 more trials to go. When we get through those, do you think we finally, can move on from this case and focus on the approach, looking at reform overall?
I think that this case will serve as almost a cornerstone of what the future looks like. I think that this will become now one of the model trials that we haven't had before. We haven't had that landmark thing that brought our country, brought everybody in our country to experience this and see what the outcome would be, and then base everything we do going forward off of this. I think that healing, we'll get there, but there's a lot of steps in between that, and that comes with consistent accountability, because this can't be a one-off. I think the fact that folks may have been more concerned with the outcome or the potential outrage after if he were acquitted, as opposed to no justice being served, is a conversation that we have to have more broadly. Our concern should be that we watch somebody be murdered in broad daylight, and we need that individual held accountable and brought to justice. But justice is typically restorative, and so that aspect of justice we're still going to always be longing for, because George Floyd won't be brought back. And so my hope is that our criminal justice system evolves from just being one that's about punitive accountability to some sort of restorative justice.